In 1849, Charleston lost a wealthy rice broker and the black woman he had freed 2 days earlier. The city called it a scandal. The family called it an embarrassment. The police called it a closed matter. But the Marsh kept one piece of evidence they never meant anyone to find. Nearly 90 years later, workers repairing an old wharf near Wappoo Creek pulled a mud-black brass compass from the ground. Inside the lid was an engraving so small it had been missed in the first inventory. North is not a place. It is us. The initials beneath it were EV and MB. And that was the first moment historians began to wonder whether Edmund Vale and Mara Bell had not died in Charleston at all. Before we begin, leave a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. Stories like this were once trapped in locked rooms, courthouse basements, and family letters. Now they travel farther than the people inside them ever could. In the summer of 1849, Charleston was a city built on polished manners and brutal truths. The harbor was crowded with schooners. Church bells moved through the humid air. Behind high garden walls, wealthy families spoke softly about lineage, property, contracts, and reputation. Edmund Vale belonged to that world. He was a rice factor with offices near East Bay Street, a man whose signature could move shipments from the Carolina Low Country to Liverpool and Havana. His father had made the fortune. Edmund had expanded it. He was known for clean clothes, careful speech, and a habit of standing at windows as if the street outside contained an answer he had not yet found. Mara Bell entered the record the way many black women of that era did, in fragments written by other people. A receipt, a household ledger, a note about the seamstress with the reading hand, a line in a shipping account that should not have had her name at all. She was about 24, born somewhere near the Combahee River, sold at least twice before she was brought into the Vale household. The surviving descriptions mention dark brown skin, a narrow face, steady eyes, and a skill that made people uncomfortable. Mara could read. Not just household labels or prayer verses. She could read contracts, manifests, letters, and the little legal traps buried in polite language. That ability made her useful. It also made her dangerous. On July 18, 1849, papers were filed in Charleston transferring Mara Bell's legal status from enslaved property to free woman. The document carried Edmund Vale's signature and the seal of a notary named Silas Pritchard. 2 days later, Edmund and Mara vanished. At first, the official story was almost aggressively simple. Edmund had run away with a woman beneath his station. Mara had seduced him. The family had been humiliated. The city would not feed the scandal by searching too loudly. But that story began to crack before the week was over. On the morning of July 23rd, a fisherman found a hired carriage half sunk in mud near a bend of Wappoo Creek, miles from the polished streets where the Vale family kept its name clean. One wheel had broken against a cypress root. The rear step was torn loose. Inside were Edmund's linen coat, a woman's blue traveling shawl, and a leather case filled with folded maps. The seat was stained dark. The first police note called it spilled ink. The second note, added later in a different hand, called it a substance not yet identified. No proper examination followed. The carriage was returned to the family within 48 hours. The shawl disappeared. The maps disappeared. The case disappeared. The report was closed with a sentence that still feels less like an explanation than a warning. Further inquiry would serve no public good. That sentence is where the real story begins, because Edmund Vale had not been acting like a man planning a reckless escape. He had been acting like a man building a route. In the months before the disappearance, he withdrew from dinners, delayed business meetings, and spent long hours in the map room above his office. He purchased a small house outside the city through an intermediary. He shifted funds into accounts that did not bear the Vale name. He requested information about packet ships moving north under weather delays, then crossed out the dates and copied them again in a different order. One ledger entry from June 1849 is especially strange. It lists 3 items paid for in cash: a compass, a woman's cloak, and 2 passages not to be spoken of. The supplier later swore he remembered nothing. Edmund's widowed aunt, Beatrice Vale, claimed she knew nothing about Mara's emancipation until after both had disappeared. That claim was repeated so often it became accepted as fact. Yet a letter discovered in 1936, hidden inside the spine of a family Bible, suggests the opposite. In it, Beatrice wrote to her brother in Philadelphia, "He has mistaken desire for duty. Our name will become a door through which every creditor, enemy, and gossip in Charleston may enter." The letter was dated July 16th, 2 days before Mara was freed. That timing matters, because the Vale family was not Edmund's only problem. Charleston society had already arranged a more acceptable future for him. He was expected, though not formally engaged, to marry Lydia Cates, daughter of Alistair Cates, a shipping investor whose warehouses sat near the Cooper River. The marriage would have joined 2 powerful sets of books, Vale Rice and Cates Ships. Then Edmund freed Mara Bell. That decision did not merely insult a family, it disrupted a business alliance. It threatened inheritance, property, credit. It disrupted a business alliance. It threatened inheritance, property, credit, and the unspoken rules that allowed men like Cates to control what could happen without ever appearing in a police file. Researchers who later examined the Cates papers found several payments made in July 1849 to a man identified only as A.M. The amounts were too large for ordinary dock work. The dates were too close to be coincidence. And beside the final payment, posted one day after the carriage was found, someone had written, "Road matter concluded." For decades, nobody knew who A.M. was. Then a police register from 1852 surfaced in a private collection. It mentioned Abel Morrow, a waterfront enforcer sometimes hired for delicate recoveries. Morrow had no formal position. There were fights, disappearances, debt collections, and one unexplained fire. He lived less than 10 minutes from the Cates warehouse. The official file never mentioned him. That silence may be the loudest evidence in the case. By this point, the story seems to point in one direction. Edmund and Mara tried to flee. Powerful men sent Morrow after them. The carriage near Wappoo Creek became the place where the escape ended. That was the version Charleston preferred to whisper. It was tragic. It was useful. And it kept everyone dead. But the dead do not usually keep writing letters. In 1961, a box of unsorted papers was opened during repairs to a meeting house in Providence, Rhode Island. Documents were sermons, abolition circulars, and invoices from printers. Folded between them were 7 letters written from 1849 to 1851 by a woman who signed only M. The handwriting was compared to Mara Bell's signature on the Emancipation Papers. It was not enough for certainty, but it was close enough to disturb the scholars who saw it. The first letter was dated September 3rd, 1849. "We arrived with less than we planned, and more fear than I can bear to describe. E. sleeps poorly. The wound in his leg opens when the weather turns wet. He says pain is proof that we are still here. I am not yet sure I believe him. E. Not Edmund, not by full name. Only E." A later letter described a room above a printer's shop, a physician who asked no questions. Physician who asked no questions. and a woman from a black church community who brought soup, clean linen, and advice about which streets not to walk after dark. Then came the line that changed the entire interpretation of Wappoo Creek. The man who followed us did not rise from the mud. I have prayed over that fact every night, though I will not pretend I wish it otherwise. If the letters are genuine, the marsh was not only the site of an attack, it was the site of a counterattack. It meant Edmund and Mara may have escaped not because no one found them, but because one of the men sent to stop them never returned to explain what happened. This explains something that had bothered researchers for years. Abel Morrow vanishes from Charleston records after July 1849. No arrest, no death certificate, no estate, no debt notice. For a man who lived inside police ledgers, his disappearance is abrupt. The city lost 3 people that week. It only admitted to losing 2. The darkest part of this case is not the possibility of violence in the marsh. It is the speed with which the violence was made convenient. After Edmund disappeared, Beatrice Vale was allowed to manage his business interests as if he were functionally dead. Within 6 months, several profitable shipping contracts had moved from Vale accounts into companies tied to Alistair Cates. Debts were settled quietly. Warehouses changed hands. Men who had once praised Edmund's judgment began describing him as unstable. Mara's name was treated differently. It was not mourned, it was not defended. It was corrected out of the record. In one copy of the emancipation document, her surname Bell is scratched so heavily the paper nearly tears. In a later index, she is listed only as female, colored, absconded. The transformation is chilling. A woman who had signed her own freedom papers became a missing object again, because that was the easiest way to make her disappear. And then there was the house. The Vale residence on Church Street remained in the family for 30 years. During a restoration in 1948, workers discovered a narrow room behind the upper library wall. It was less than 7 feet wide, with no window and a slanted ceiling. The official explanation was storage, but the room contained a shelf, a small writing board, and scratch marks along the inside of the door frame. Behind a loose plaster seam, workers found 3 items wrapped in oilcloth, a ribbon of blue silk, a torn page from a book of Psalms, and a single sheet of verse written in a feminine hand. One line was underlined twice. A door is only a wall that has been taught to open and taught to open. The paper carried no name, but the ink, the hand, and the date written at the top, May 12, 1849, place it inside the final weeks before Mara's emancipation. It is impossible to prove she wrote it. It is also impossible to read it without hearing a person practicing freedom before the law allowed it to exist. The hidden room shifted the story again. It suggested Edmund and Mara's relationship had not been a sudden scandal. It had been a long, dangerous conspiracy of tenderness, meetings behind walls, documents read by candlelight, routes copied from shipping maps, a future assembled one forbidden detail at a time. But if the Providence letters are real, their future did not immediately feel like victory. One letter from January 1850 says, "We speak new names aloud until they no longer taste borrowed. He walks with a cane now. I keep the compass wrapped in linen because the sight of it makes him quiet. Some nights I think we did not escape Charleston. I think we carried it inside us, plank by plank. The new names may appear in an 1850 Providence directory. Elias Ward, engraver of maps, and Mary Ward, seamstress, recently arrived from the South. No one has proven Elias Ward was Edmund Vale. No one has proven Mary Ward was Mara Bell. But the details gather weight. Elias Ward walked with a permanent limp. Mary Ward appears in records connected to a black mutual aid society and a small abolitionist reading circle. Their shop printed coastal charts, school primers, and later anti-slavery pamphlets under another printer's imprint. In 1854, a short piece appeared anonymously in a reform journal under the title "The Road Through Salt Water." It tells of a man and woman fleeing a southern city, a broken carriage near marshland, a hired pursuer, a compass with a damaged needle, and a promise not to look back until the first northern church bell rang. The piece is fiction. But fiction has always been one of the places truth hides when official records become too dangerous. One sentence from that story feels less invented than remembered. He bled into the tide grass, and I learned there are freedoms that begin not with permission, but with refusal. After 1856, Elias and Mary Ward vanish from Providence directories. For a long time, that was where the trail ended. Then, in 1972, a small burial ground in western Massachusetts was cataloged before a road expansion. One marker, half buried under moss, carried only initials and dates: EV 1808 to 1871, MB 1825 to 1888. No surnames. The cemetery records identified the plot as belonging to the Ward family, but the earliest entries were copied from an older, damaged register. A local historian noted that the couple had operated a map and print shop before the Civil War, and were remembered for helping people traveling north under assumed names. The grave proves nothing by itself. The grave proves nothing by itself, but when placed beside the letters, the limp, the printing work, the abolition ties, the initials, and the compass, it becomes difficult to dismiss. The most haunting discovery came last. The brass compass recovered near Wappoo Creek was eventually transferred to a museum storage room. For years, it sat in a drawer, tagged incorrectly as Maritime Instrument, Unknown Owner. In 1989, a conservator opened it for cleaning and found the inner hinge packed with dried marsh silt. Under the silt was the engraving, "North is not a place, it is us." Below that, almost worn away, was a second line, "If we are separated, follow the water." That second sentence changes the object completely. It was not a romantic gift. It was an escape tool, a promise, a backup plan, and perhaps a farewell, written by two people who understood that the road to freedom might split before it opened. Local folklore around Wappoo Creek still carries pieces of the old story. Some residents speak of carriage wheels heard on airless nights. Others tell of a woman in a blue shawl standing where the marsh grass bends toward the tide. Those details are impossible to verify, and they may tell us more about Charleston's need for ghosts than about Edmund and Mara themselves. But legends often gather where records have been wounded. What makes this case endure is not the possibility that something supernatural remained at the creek. It is the possibility that the living did what the official world insisted they could not do. They planned. They resisted. They survived. They changed names and kept moving. And every institution that should have recorded them clearly had a reason to blur them instead. The Vale family needed shame to look like grief. The Cates family needed violence to look like rumor. The police needed a closed file. The city needed Mara Bell to become invisible again. But paper has a strange afterlife. A scratched emancipation record. A hidden poem. A ledger payment. 7 letters in Providence. A fictional story that is too specific to be only fiction. A grave with initials. A compass pulled from mud. Each fragment is too small to carry the truth alone. Together, they form the outline of two people moving through a world designed to deny them every legal, social, and physical path forward. The ending, if we can call it that, is not clean. Maybe Edmund Vale and Mara died in the marsh, and later evidence has been stitched into a rescue story because rescue is easier to bear. Maybe they reached Providence but never stopped being hunted. Maybe Elias and Mary Ward were exactly who the records say they were, two ordinary people from the South whose lives happen to resemble a mystery. But history is rarely generous enough to give certainty to the people it tried to erase. What it gives instead are pressure marks, where a name was removed, where a payment was disguised, where a room was sealed, where a compass was buried, where a woman wrote only an initial because a full name could still endanger her life. July 20th, 1849, Charleston believed Edmund Vale and Mara Bell had stepped outside the lines of the world and been punished for it. A century later, the evidence suggested something far more threatening to that world. They may have escaped it, not untouched, not unafraid, not without blood in the marsh behind them, but alive enough to choose new names, alive enough to print maps for other people searching for a way through, alive enough, perhaps, to be buried together beneath initials that revealed everything only to someone who already knew how to read the silence. The compass is not always on display. Museum staff have given ordinary explanations for that: conservation schedules, cataloging backlogs, exhibition limits. Still, one detail has become part of the story. When the compass is opened, its needle does not settle cleanly north. It trembles, drifts, and points a few degrees east toward the old harbor mouth, toward the water route out of Charleston. Mechanical damage, most likely. Age, salt, time. Or maybe just the last stubborn gesture of an object made for two people who discovered that north was never only a direction. Sometimes north is a decision. And sometimes the most dangerous promise in a lockdown world is not, "I love you." It is, "I will get you out."